What if I told you that creativity isn't reserved for the chosen few, but is actually your birthright as a human being? Today, we're diving deep into Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear by Elizabeth Gilbert, a book that has transformed millions of lives and spent months on the New York Times bestseller list, inspiring creatives worldwide to embrace their artistic nature. Elizabeth Gilbert is the internationally acclaimed author of Eat, Pray, Love, which sold over 30 million copies worldwide and was adapted into a major motion picture. A journalist turned best-selling novelist, Gilbert has spent decades exploring the intersection of creativity, spirituality, and human potential. In Big Magic, she reveals her revolutionary approach to understanding creativity, not as a tortured, mysterious process, but as a collaborative dance between human curiosity and the living force of inspiration itself. If you're someone who's ever felt stuck in creative paralysis, afraid to pursue your artistic dreams, or convinced that you're not creative enough, then these next 45 minutes contain the keys to unlocking your creative potential and living with more courage, curiosity, and joy. The truth is that fear will always be part of the creative process, but it doesn't have to drive the car. This isn't about becoming a starving artist or abandoning practical reality. It's about discovering the magic that happens when you choose curiosity over fear, when you give yourself permission to create simply because you're human, and when you trust the mysterious forces that want to work through you. Big Magic offers a radically different way of thinking about creativity that will liberate you from the myths and pressures that keep so many people from expressing their authentic selves. Chapter 1: Courage, the Foundation of Creative Living. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert explains that courage is the bedrock upon which all creative living is built. Gilbert spent years studying the creative process, both through her own writing career and by observing other artists, and discovered that the difference between those who create and those who don't isn't talent or education, it's courage. The problem most people face is that they wait for fear to disappear before they begin creating. They believe that brave people don't feel afraid, so they postpone their creative dreams indefinitely, waiting for a fearless moment that never comes. But Gilbert's research shows a breakthrough insight. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's feeling the fear and creating anyway. Through decades of her own creative work and conversations with artists across disciplines, Gilbert discovered that fear and creativity are forever linked. Fear will always show up when we're doing something that matters to us, because fear's job is to protect us from anything that feels uncertain or vulnerable. This challenges the common belief that we need to overcome our fears to be creative. Instead, Gilbert's contrarian insight suggests we need to make peace with fear and invite it along for the creative journey. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, your fear will always be triggered by your creativity, because creativity asks you to enter into realms of uncertain outcomes, and fear hates uncertain outcomes. This is nothing to be ashamed of. Fear is not a bug in the system, it's a feature. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her own creative journey, describing how for years she worked as a waitress while writing short stories that were consistently rejected. Every morning, she felt terror about facing another day of potential rejection and failure. But instead of letting fear stop her, she developed what she calls a creative practice of stubborn gladness. She would acknowledge her fear. "Hello, fear. I know you're worried about me getting hurt," and then continue with her creative work anyway. She treated fear like a backseat passenger on a road trip, allowed to come along but never allowed to drive or choose the destination. This practice helped her persist through years of rejection until she finally achieved success. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests developing what she calls creative courage, which means showing up consistently to do creative work regardless of how you feel. Start by identifying one creative project that both excites and terrifies you. That's usually a sign it matters to you. Next, create a daily creative practice, even if it's just 15 minutes. The key is consistency, not perfection. When fear arises, and it will, acknowledge it without judgment. "I see you, fear. Thanks for trying to protect me, but I'm going to keep creating anyway." Gilbert warns against the common mistake of trying to eliminate fear entirely. Instead, focus on changing your relationship with fear from enemy to traveling companion. One practical tool from Big Magic is the fear inventory. Write down all your creative fears, then ask yourself, what would I do if I weren't afraid? This helps separate real dangers from imagined ones. The deeper truth here is that creative courage is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. When you choose to create despite your fears, you don't just produce art, you transform your entire relationship with uncertainty and possibility. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is our natural state as human beings. People who master this principle experience not just artistic fulfillment, but a deeper sense of aliveness and authentic self-expression. As the research in Big Magic shows, those who live courageously tend to report higher levels of life satisfaction and meaning. Your actions step from this chapter. Choose one creative project you've been avoiding due to fear and commit to working on it for 15 minutes today. Notice what fears arise and practice acknowledging them without letting them stop you. This simple practice builds the courage muscle essential for all creative living. Chapter 2. Enchantment Ideas as Living Beings. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert reveals one of her most revolutionary concepts. Ideas are not things we possess, but living beings that possess us. This represents a complete paradigm shift from how most people think about creativity and inspiration. Gilbert developed this philosophy through years of observing patterns in her own creative work and studying historical accounts of artistic inspiration. She noticed that ideas seem to have their own agenda, arriving unbidden and sometimes departing just as mysteriously. The problem most people face is treating ideas as property to be hoarded rather than gifts to be received and shared. But Gilbert's research shows a fascinating discovery. Ideas exist independently in what she calls the realm of ideas, actively seeking human collaborators to bring them into physical reality. Through her extensive experience as a novelist and her conversations with other creatives, she observed that the same ideas often visit multiple people simultaneously, which explains why similar inventions or artistic works often emerge at the same time from different creators. This challenges the common belief that creativity comes from individual genius. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight suggests that we're collaborators in a cosmic creative process much larger than ourselves. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, ideas spend eternity swirling around us, searching for available and willing human partners. When an idea thinks it has found somebody who might be able to bring it into the world, the idea will pay you a visit. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the extraordinary story of her novel, The Signature of All Things. After finishing Eat, Pray, Love, she felt completely stuck and uninspired. Then, one day while gardening, she suddenly became obsessed with 19th-century botanical exploration, a subject she'd never shown interest in before. The idea arrived so completely formed that she could envision the entire novel, a story about a female botanist in the 1800s. She spent years researching and writing this book, feeling as though the story was being given to her rather than created by her. When the novel became a critical and commercial success, Gilbert credited her role as the idea's faithful servant rather than its master. This demonstrates the principle of creative receptivity in action. Instead of forcing inspiration, Gilbert learned to remain open and available to whatever ideas wanted to work through her. The results were profound. Some of her best work came from this collaborative approach rather than from trying to control the creative process. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests cultivating what she calls creative availability, a state of openness to inspiration from unexpected sources. Begin each creative session by silently announcing your willingness to collaborate. I'm here and available to work with whatever wants to come through me today. Keep an idea journal where you capture every creative impulse, no matter how strange or impractical it seems. The key is treating these ideas as honored guests rather than your personal property. Don't judge ideas immediately. Instead, ask, what does this idea need from me to come alive? Gilbert warns against the common mistake of trying to force ideas to appear on your timeline. Instead, focus on creating conditions that invite inspiration. Regular creative practice, exposure to beauty and novelty, and maintaining childlike curiosity about the world. One practical tool from Big Magic is the idea interview. When an idea visits you, have a conversation with it. Ask, what are you? What do you need? How can I help you? This practice helps you understand your role as the idea's collaborator rather than its master. The deeper truth here is that this approach removes the crushing pressure of individual creative responsibility. When you understand that ideas have their own intelligence and agenda, you don't just reduce creative anxiety. You tap into a source of inspiration far greater than your individual mind. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is a mysterious, magical process that transcends human understanding. People who master this principle experience what she calls creative flow states, where the work seems to do itself through them. As the research in Big Magic shows, artists who embrace this collaborative mindset often report feeling more inspired and less blocked. Your action step from this chapter: start an idea journal today and commit to writing down every creative impulse for 1 week, no matter how small. Practice treating each idea as a separate being that has chosen to visit you. Notice how this shift in perspective affects your relationship with creativity. Chapter 3: Permission, Claiming Your Creative Birthright. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert tackles one of the biggest obstacles to creative living: the myth that you need permission from others to create. Gilbert discovered through her own journey and countless conversations with aspiring creatives that most people spend years waiting for external validation before they give themselves permission to pursue their artistic dreams. Gilbert's background growing up in a practical, working-class family taught her that creativity was a luxury rather than a necessity. She watched people around her suppress their creative impulses because they believed they weren't qualified or good enough to call themselves artists. The problem most people face is seeking permission from authorities, institutions, or society to validate their right to create. But Gilbert's breakthrough insight reveals that no external authority is qualified to grant or deny your creative permission. Through her own experience of becoming a writer without formal credentials or connections, she discovered that creativity is a birthright, not a privilege to be earned. She realized that the only permission that matters is the permission you give yourself. This challenges the common belief that you need an MFA, gallery representation, or critical acclaim to be a real artist. Instead, Gilbert's research shows that the most liberated and prolific creators are those who give themselves permission to make art simply because they're human beings with creative impulses. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, you do not need anybody's permission to live a creative life. You especially do not need your parents' permission. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her friend who spent decades dreaming of becoming a jewelry designer but never pursued it because she believed she needed formal training and industry connections. She waited for someone to discover her talent and invite her into the jewelry world. Finally, at age 50, she decided to stop waiting for permission. She bought basic tools, started making simple pieces in her garage, and began selling them at local craft fairs. Within 2 years, her unique designs attracted gallery attention, and she built a thriving business. The transformation happened not because she suddenly became more talented, but because she finally gave herself permission to begin. This demonstrates the principle of self-authorization in action. The woman's jewelry-making skills developed through practice, but the crucial first step was claiming her right to try. Her success came from treating creativity as an inherent human capacity rather than an exclusive club requiring special admission. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests conducting what she calls a permission audit. Examine all the ways you've been waiting for external validation before pursuing creative projects. Write down every excuse you've used. I'm not trained enough. I'm too old. I don't have connections. Real artists don't do it this way. Next, practice what Gilbert calls creative self-authorization. Choose one creative project you've been postponing and announce to yourself, I hereby give myself full permission to explore this, regardless of the outcome. The key is shifting from external validation to internal validation. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of believing that formal education or credentials are prerequisites for creativity. Instead, focus on what she calls curiosity-driven learning, following your interests and learning what you need as you go. One practical tool from Big Magic is creating your own artist statement that validates your right to create, regardless of your background or experience level. The deeper truth here is that permission-seeking is often procrastination in disguise. When you wait for others to validate your creative dreams, you don't just delay your artistic development. You surrender your power to external forces that may never grant the permission you seek. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity belongs to everyone, not just a select few with special credentials. People who master this self-authorization principle experience what she calls creative freedom, the ability to explore, experiment, and express without needing external approval. As the stories in Big Magic demonstrate, Some of history's most innovative artists were self-taught individuals who gave themselves permission to create outside established systems. Your action step from this chapter: write yourself a formal, creative permission slip, granting yourself full authorization to pursue one creative project you've been avoiding. Sign it, date it, and post it where you'll see it daily. This symbolic act helps internalize your creative authority. Chapter 4: Persistence, the daily practice of showing up. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert emphasizes that persistence, not inspiration, is the true secret of creative success. Gilbert spent years observing both successful and unsuccessful creatives, and she discovered that talent and inspiration are less important than the simple willingness to show up consistently, even when you don't feel like it. Gilbert's own writing career began with years of rejection and failure, but she developed what she calls professional persistence, treating her creative work with the same reliability as any other job. She noticed that many talented people abandoned their creative dreams not because they lacked ability, but because they lacked the persistence to continue through inevitable periods of difficulty and doubt. But Gilbert's research reveals a crucial insight. Persistence isn't about grinding through misery or forcing creativity to happen. Instead, it's about developing what she calls devotional persistence, showing up with love and dedication to the creative process itself, regardless of external rewards or recognition. This challenges the common belief that creative work should always feel inspired and effortless. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough understanding suggests that persistence creates the conditions for inspiration to arise, not the other way around. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, if you want to be a writer, you must do two things above all others: read a lot and write a lot. There's no way around these two things that I'm aware of, no shortcut. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her friend who wanted to become a novelist, but only wrote when she felt inspired, which happened maybe once a month. She produced very little work and constantly felt frustrated by her lack of progress. Gilbert encouraged her to commit to writing for just 30 minutes every morning before work, regardless of how she felt. At first, the friend resisted, claiming she couldn't write without inspiration. But after 6 months of daily practice, something shifted. Not only had she completed her first novel draft, but inspiration began visiting her more frequently during her regular writing sessions. This demonstrates the principle of persistence creating opportunity for inspiration. The friend's breakthrough came not from waiting for perfect conditions, but from creating a reliable structure that allowed creativity to develop and flourish. Her consistent practice trained her creative muscles and made her available when inspiration chose to visit. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests establishing what she calls creative devotional practice, a regular time and place where you show up to do creative work, regardless of your mood or inspiration level. Start small, commit to just 15 minutes daily at the same time. The key is treating this commitment as non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth. Don't judge the quality of what you create during these sessions. Simply focus on honoring your commitment to show up. Create a simple ritual to begin each session, lighting a candle, playing specific music, or saying a short prayer to mark the transition into creative time. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of waiting for long blocks of free time or perfect conditions. Instead, focus on consistency over duration. One practical tool from Big Magic is tracking your creative persistence. Mark an X on a calendar for each day you honor your creative commitment, aiming to build an unbroken chain. The deeper truth here is that persistence transforms both your relationship with creativity and your identity as a creative person. When you show up consistently, you don't just produce more work. You develop what Gilbert calls creative confidence, the deep knowing that you can rely on yourself to honor your artistic commitments. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is a practice, not a product. People who master persistent practice experience what she calls creative momentum, the compound effect of daily creative actions that builds over time into significant artistic achievement. As the research in Big Magic shows, most successful creatives attribute their achievements more to persistence than to talent or luck. Your action step from this chapter: choose a 15-minute daily time slot for creative work and commit to showing up for 7 consecutive days, regardless of inspiration or mood. Track your commitment with simple marks on a calendar. Notice how persistence affects both your creative output and your confidence as a creative person. Chapter 5: Trust, surrendering attachment to outcomes. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert explores one of the most challenging aspects of creative living, learning to trust the process without attachment to specific outcomes. Gilbert discovered through years of creative ups and downs that attachment to results, whether success, recognition, or financial reward, often becomes the very thing that kills creativity. Gilbert's experience after the massive success of Eat, Pray, Love taught her about the dangers of outcome attachment. She found herself paralyzed by expectations for her next book, worried that anything she wrote would be compared unfavorably to her bestseller. The problem most people face is creating with one eye on the work and another on how it will be received, which splits their creative attention and diminishes their artistic authenticity. But Gilbert's research revealed a liberating truth. The creative process works best when we trust it completely while holding outcomes lightly. Through studying artists across disciplines and examining her own creative patterns, she discovered that the most fulfilling and sustainable creativity comes from what she calls devotional creation, making art as an act of love rather than as a strategy for achievement. This challenges the common belief that creative work should be measured primarily by external success. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight suggests that the creative process itself is the reward, and that trusting this process leads to both better art and greater personal fulfillment. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, "The results of my work don't have much to do with me. I can only be in charge of producing the work itself." Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her friend who spent years writing poetry but became increasingly bitter because her work wasn't getting published or recognized. She began writing with resentment and desperation, constantly checking literary magazines to see if lesser poets were getting accepted while she was rejected. Gilbert suggested an experiment: write poetry purely for the love of it without submitting anything for publication for 1 full year. Initially resistant, the friend eventually agreed. During that year, her writing transformed. Freed from the pressure of external validation, she rediscovered her authentic voice and the pure joy of playing with language. Ironically, when she finally returned to submitting work, her acceptance rate improved dramatically because her writing had become more genuine and powerful. This demonstrates the principle of creative trust in action. By releasing attachment to outcomes, the friend reconnected with the intrinsic rewards of creativity. Her improved results came as a byproduct of trusting the process rather than manipulating it for specific outcomes. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests practicing what she calls outcome detachment. Create with full commitment and effort while holding results lightly. Before beginning any creative project, set what she calls a process intention rather than an outcome goal. Instead of "I want this painting to sell" or "I hope this story gets published," try "I want to explore color and emotion" or "I want to discover what this character has to say." Develop a pre-creation ritual that helps you release attachment. Take 3 deep breaths and silently dedicate your creative session to the joy of creation itself. The key is shifting focus from external validation to internal satisfaction and growth. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of using creativity as a strategy to achieve non-creative goals like fame, money, or social status. Instead, focus on what she calls creative integrity, making choices based on artistic truth rather than market considerations. One practical tool from Big Magic is the Creative Satisfaction Inventory. Regularly assess whether your creative work is bringing you joy and fulfillment, regardless of external reception. The deeper truth here is that trust transforms the entire creative experience from anxiety-provoking to life-affirming. When you trust the process without attachment to outcomes, you don't just create more freely. You tap into what Gilbert calls creative flow, where the work becomes effortless and joyful. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is a spiritual practice as much as an artistic one. People who master creative trust experience what she calls artistic serenity, the ability to create with full engagement while remaining detached from results. As the examples in Big Magic demonstrate, this trust often paradoxically leads to better external outcomes because the work becomes more authentic and powerful. Your action step from this chapter. Before your next creative session, write down one process intention, what you want to explore or learn, and consciously release any attachment to specific outcomes. Practice creating purely for the intrinsic joy and satisfaction of the creative act itself. Chapter 6. Enchantment, Living in Creative Wonder. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert reveals that enchantment is the secret ingredient that transforms ordinary life into creative magic. Gilbert discovered through her own creative journey and extensive research that people who live enchanted lives are simply those who choose to see the world as inherently mysterious, beautiful, and full of creative possibility. Gilbert's understanding of enchantment developed during her travels while researching Eat, Pray, Love. She noticed that certain people seemed to move through the world with a sense of wonder and curiosity that made everything feel more alive and interesting. The problem most people face is becoming cynical and closed off as adults, losing the natural enchantment they felt as children when everything seemed magical and full of potential. But Gilbert's research shows a transformative insight. Enchantment isn't something that happens to us. It's something we actively choose to cultivate. Through studying creative individuals across cultures and disciplines, she discovered that the most creative people are those who maintain what she calls sacred curiosity, the ability to find wonder and fascination in everyday experiences. This challenges the common belief that enchantment is naive or impractical in the modern world. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough understanding suggests that enchantment is actually the most practical approach to creative living because it keeps us open to inspiration and possibility. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, the universe buries strange jewels deep within us all and then stands back to see if we can find them. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her encounter with a hummingbird during a difficult period of writer's block. Most people would simply notice the bird and move on, but Gilbert chose to see it as a creative messenger. She spent time observing its movements, researching hummingbird behavior, and allowing herself to be amazed by its impossibly rapid wing beats. This moment of chosen enchantment sparked a creative breakthrough. The hummingbird became a metaphor in her writing for persistence and the ability to hover in uncertainty while still moving forward. What could have been a mundane moment became a source of artistic inspiration because Gilbert chose to approach it with wonder and curiosity. This demonstrates the principle of active enchantment in action. Gilbert's creative breakthrough came not from forcing inspiration, but from remaining open to finding magic in ordinary moments. Her choice to engage with wonder transformed a simple nature encounter into artistic fuel. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests cultivating what she calls daily wonder practice, deliberately seeking moments of enchantment in your regular routine. This might mean really looking at the way light falls through your window, marveling at the complexity of your morning coffee, or being amazed by the fact that you can communicate with others through written symbols. Set a daily intention to find at least 3 things that genuinely fascinate or amaze you. Keep an enchantment journal where you record these moments of wonder. The key is approaching familiar things with fresh eyes, as if seeing them for the first time. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of dismissing wonder as childish or unproductive. Instead, focus on what she calls sophisticated curiosity, bringing mature attention and appreciation to the mysteries around you. One practical tool from Big Magic is the Wonder Walk, taking regular walks with the specific intention of noticing something beautiful, strange, or fascinating that you've never seen before. The deeper truth here is that enchantment is the fuel that keeps creativity alive over the long term. When you maintain a sense of wonder about the world, you don't just stay inspired. You become a magnet for the kind of experiences and ideas that lead to meaningful creative work. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is fundamentally about paying attention to life with love and curiosity. People who master the art of enchantment experience what she calls creative aliveness, a heightened awareness of beauty and possibility that infuses everything they do. As the research in Big Magic shows, maintaining wonder and curiosity is one of the strongest predictors of sustained creative output throughout life. Your action step from this chapter: start a wonder journal today and commit to writing down 3 things that amazed, fascinated, or enchanted you each day for 1 week. Practice approaching familiar experiences with fresh curiosity and attention. Chapter 7: Persistence Building Creative Resilience. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert delves deeper into persistence by exploring how to build creative resilience, the ability to continue creating through rejection, criticism, and apparent failure. Gilbert learned through her own years of rejection before success that persistence isn't just about continuing to work. It's about developing the emotional and psychological tools to weather the inevitable storms of creative life. Gilbert's early career involved countless rejections from publishers and magazines, sometimes receiving form letters that didn't even include her name. She watched many talented writers give up after a few rejections, while others persisted for decades without achieving traditional success. The problem most people face is treating rejection and criticism as evidence that they should quit rather than as natural parts of the creative process. But Gilbert's research reveals a crucial distinction. Resilient creators don't experience less rejection or criticism. They develop better strategies for processing and learning from these experiences. Through studying long-term creative careers and examining her own responses to setbacks, she discovered that persistence requires what she calls creative resilience training, deliberately building your capacity to bounce back from disappointments. This challenges the common belief that successful artists are those who face fewer obstacles. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight shows that successful artists are simply those who develop better tools for working with obstacles. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, if you want to live a creative life, you must lose your fear of being wrong. You must learn to fail gladly. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of a painter friend who received a devastating review from a prominent art critic. The review was not just negative but personally attacking, questioning the artist's talent, intelligence, and even right to make art. Many artists would have been crushed and potentially quit painting entirely. Instead, the painter used what Gilbert calls the creative resilience protocol. First, she allowed herself to feel hurt for exactly 24 hours, crying, raging, and fully experiencing the emotional impact. Then she asked herself, "What can I learn from this criticism?" She identified one valid technical point amid the harsh language. Finally, she used the experience as fuel, creating a powerful new series of paintings inspired by themes of criticism and resilience. The series became some of her most acclaimed work. This demonstrates the principle of transforming setbacks into creative fuel. The painter's breakthrough came not from avoiding criticism, but from developing a systematic approach to processing it constructively. Her ability to extract learning while protecting her creative spirit allowed her to grow stronger rather than be diminished by the experience. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests developing your own creative resilience toolkit, specific strategies for dealing with rejection, criticism, and creative challenges. Create what she calls a rejection ritual. When you receive a rejection or criticism, allow yourself to feel disappointed for a specific time period, maybe 1 hour or 1 day. Then actively look for any useful feedback while discarding personal attacks. Build what Gilbert calls your creative support network, people who believe in your creative worth regardless of external success. The key is having safe spaces to process disappointments without having your fundamental creative identity questioned. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of taking rejection or criticism as personal verdicts on your worth as a human being. Instead, focus on what she calls professional detachment, understanding that creative work exists in a marketplace of subjective opinions, and that rejection often has more to do with timing, taste, or market conditions than with the quality of your work. One practical tool from Big Magic is creating a Creative Victories file, collecting every positive response to your work, no matter how small. When facing rejection or criticism, review this file to remember that your work has value and has touched others positively. The deeper truth here is that resilience is what separates long-term creative success from early burnout. When you develop the ability to persist through challenges, you don't just increase your chances of external success. You build the inner strength necessary for sustained creative growth and satisfaction. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is a marathon, not a sprint. People who master creative resilience experience what she calls antifragility, the ability to actually grow stronger and more creative through challenges rather than being weakened by them. As the research in Big Magic demonstrates, most successful creative careers include long periods of apparent failure that ultimately contribute to eventual breakthroughs. Your action step from this chapter: create your personal rejection ritual and Creative Victories file today. The next time you face creative disappointment, use your ritual to process it constructively while consulting your victories file to maintain perspective on your creative worth and potential. Chapter 8: Trust, the Courage to Begin Again. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert explores what she calls the courage to begin again, perhaps the most essential form of creative trust. Gilbert discovered through her own career cycles and observing other artists that creativity requires constantly returning to the beginner's mind, starting new projects despite past failures, and trusting that each new creative endeavor deserves your full commitment regardless of previous outcomes. Gilbert's experience after publishing several successful books taught her about the challenge of beginning again. Each new project required her to overcome the voice that whispered, "What if this one isn't as good?" Or, "Maybe you've already said everything you have to say." The problem most people face is allowing past successes or failures to create pressure or paralysis that prevents them from approaching new creative work with fresh eyes and open hearts. But Gilbert's research reveals a liberating truth. Every creative project exists in its own universe, independent of everything that came before. Through studying artists who maintained long, productive careers, she discovered that the most successful creators are those who treat each new project as if they're creating for the first time, bringing what she calls beginner's enthusiasm to every creative endeavor. This challenges the common belief that past creative experiences should determine future expectations or approaches. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight suggests that creative trust means treating each new project as a fresh conversation between yourself and your curiosity. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, done is better than good, because the quest for perfection can become the enemy of completion. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of her approach to writing the signature of all things after the massive success of Eat, Pray, Love. Every publishing expert advised her to write another memoir to capitalize on her established success. The pressure to repeat her previous achievement was enormous. Instead, Gilbert chose to trust her curiosity about 19th century botany, despite having no expertise in the subject and no guarantee that readers would follow her into such different territory. She approached the research and writing with the same fresh excitement she'd felt as a beginning writer, treating it as a new adventure rather than a calculated career move. The novel became a critical and commercial success precisely because she brought authentic curiosity rather than strategic thinking to the project. This demonstrates the principle of creative renewal in action. Gilbert's success came from trusting her genuine interests rather than trying to repeat past formulas. Her willingness to begin again as a botanical fiction novice allowed her to create something genuinely fresh and compelling. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests practicing what she calls creative amnesia, deliberately forgetting past creative outcomes when beginning new projects. Before starting any new creative work, spend a few minutes connecting with your genuine curiosity about the project itself, setting aside concerns about how it might compare to previous work or be received by others. Develop what Gilbert calls beginner rituals, specific practices that help you return to fresh-eyed curiosity. This might include meditation, taking a walk in nature, or asking yourself, "What would I create if no one would ever see it?" The key is accessing the excitement and wonder you felt when you first discovered your love of creating. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of letting past creative experiences create rigid expectations for future work. Instead, focus on what she calls creative present moment awareness, bringing full attention and curiosity to whatever creative work is in front of you right now. One practical tool from Big Magic is the Fresh Start ritual. At the beginning of each creative session, take 3 deep breaths and set an intention to approach your work with beginner's mind, regardless of what happened yesterday or what might happen tomorrow. The deeper truth here is that creative trust requires continuously letting go of who you were as an artist to become who you're meant to be next. When you approach each creative project with fresh trust and curiosity, you don't just avoid creative stagnation. You open yourself to continuous growth and surprise in your artistic development. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is an ongoing conversation with mystery rather than an attempt to control outcomes. People who master the art of beginning again experience what she calls creative regeneration, the ability to find fresh enthusiasm and inspiration regardless of past experiences. As the examples in Big Magic show, the most enduring creative careers belong to those who never lose their capacity for creative wonder and renewal. Your action step from this chapter. Before your next creative session, practice creative amnesia. Set aside all concerns about past creative work or future outcomes and approach your current project as if you're creating for the very first time. Notice how this shift affects your energy and enthusiasm for the work. Chapter 9. Divinity, the sacred dimension of creativity. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert explores what she considers the most mysterious aspect of creativity, its connection to something larger than ourselves. Gilbert discovered through years of creative work and spiritual exploration that creativity has a sacred dimension that transcends individual effort and connects us to what she calls the divine source of all making. Gilbert's understanding of creativity's sacred nature developed gradually through her writing practice. She began noticing moments when her work seemed to write itself, when ideas arrived fully formed, and when solutions appeared seemingly from nowhere. The problem most people face is approaching creativity as purely mechanical or psychological, missing the spiritual dimension that can transform creative work from labor into communion with mystery. But Gilbert's research into creative traditions across cultures revealed that artists throughout history have recognized creativity's divine connection. From ancient Greek invocations of the Muses to indigenous ceremonies honoring creative spirits, human beings have long understood that true creativity involves collaboration with forces beyond individual consciousness. Through studying these traditions and examining her own experiences, Gilbert developed what she calls creative spirituality, approaching artistic work as a form of prayer and service. This challenges the common belief that creativity is purely a product of individual talent, education, or effort. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight suggests that creativity is a form of spiritual practice that connects us to the source of all life and beauty. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, I believe that our planet is inhabited not only by animals and plants and bacteria and viruses, but also by ideas. Ideas are a disembodied, energetic life form. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of attending a poetry reading where the poet seemed to channel something beyond his individual personality. The words flowed through him with such power and authenticity that the entire audience felt they were witnessing something sacred. After the reading, the poet himself seemed surprised by what had emerged, saying he felt like he'd been used by the poem rather than creating it. This experience helped Gilbert understand what she calls creative channeling, moments when artists become conduits for creative energy that exceeds their individual capacity. The poet's breakthrough came not from trying harder or being more clever, but from getting out of his own way and allowing something greater to work through him. His willingness to serve the poem rather than control it created space for genuine magic to occur. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests developing what she calls creative devotional practice, approaching your artistic work as a form of service to beauty and truth rather than personal achievement. Begin each creative session with a moment of gratitude and offering. Thank you for the gift of creativity. How may I serve what wants to be born through me today? Create sacred space for your creative work through simple rituals. Lighting a candle, playing inspiring music, or saying a brief prayer or intention. The key is recognizing that you're participating in something larger than yourself while still taking responsibility for showing up with skill and dedication. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of either dismissing creativity's sacred dimension as superstition or using it as an excuse for lack of effort. Instead, focus on what she calls sacred professionalism, bringing both spiritual openness and practical discipline to your creative practice. One practical tool from Big Magic is the creative offering, dedicating each piece of work to something you love or value beyond yourself. This might be dedicating a painting to the beauty of nature, a song to the healing of others, or a story to the celebration of human resilience. The deeper truth here is that recognizing creativity's sacred dimension transforms both the process and the results of artistic work. When you approach creativity as spiritual practice, you don't just create more meaningful art. You experience what Gilbert calls creative transcendence, moments when making art becomes a form of prayer and communion with the divine source of all beauty. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is fundamentally about love of beauty, truth, expression, and the mystery of existence itself. People who master creative spirituality experience what she calls artistic devotion, the deep satisfaction that comes from serving something greater than personal ego or ambition. As the traditions explored in Big Magic demonstrate, artists throughout history have found their greatest fulfillment and most powerful work through recognizing and honoring creativity's sacred dimension. Your action step from this chapter. Create a simple ritual to begin your next creative session. Light a candle, say a brief prayer or intention, or dedicate your work to something you love beyond yourself. Practice approaching your creativity as a form of spiritual service and notice how this affects both your process and your sense of fulfillment. Chapter 10, Big Magic: Living the Creative Life. In Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert brings together all the elements of creative living into what she calls Big Magic, the extraordinary life that becomes possible when we fully embrace our creative nature. Gilbert discovered through her own transformation and countless conversations with artists that big magic isn't a destination, but a way of being that integrates courage, curiosity, trust, and wonder into every aspect of life. Gilbert's understanding of big magic crystallized during a period of deep reflection after achieving traditional success. She realized that the most fulfilling moments of her creative life weren't the public victories, but the private moments of communion with creativity itself. The times when she felt most alive, most connected to mystery, and most authentically herself. The problem most people face is thinking that big magic requires special circumstances, extraordinary talent, or external validation, when actually it's available to anyone willing to live with creative courage and curiosity. But Gilbert's research into creative lives reveals a profound truth. Big magic is simply what happens when ordinary people choose to live extraordinarily creative lives. Through studying individuals who had transformed their existence through creative practice, she discovered that big magic manifests differently for each person, but always involves the same core elements: showing up consistently, staying curious, trusting the process, and maintaining wonder about life's mysteries. This challenges the common belief that meaningful creative life is reserved for professional artists or those with special gifts. Instead, Gilbert's breakthrough insight demonstrates that big magic is available to anyone willing to make creativity a priority and approach life with artistic consciousness. As Gilbert puts it in Big Magic, the creative life is amplified life. It's a bigger life, a happier life, an expanded life, and a hell of a lot more interesting life. Let me give you a real example from the book. Gilbert shares the story of meeting a woman at a conference who had transformed her entire existence through what she called creative living. This woman wasn't a professional artist, but she approached everything: her garden, her cooking, her relationships, even her accounting work, with creative consciousness and artistic attention. She had turned her small apartment into a beautiful sanctuary, grown an extraordinary container garden, and developed innovative approaches to her corporate job that made her work more efficient and enjoyable. Most remarkably, she radiated a sense of aliveness and enthusiasm that was infectious. When Gilbert asked her secret, the woman explained that she had simply decided to treat her entire life as a creative project, bringing the same attention and care to daily tasks that artists bring to their masterpieces. This demonstrates the principle of integrated creative living in action. The woman's transformation came not from changing her external circumstances, but from changing her relationship to those circumstances. Her willingness to approach ordinary life with extraordinary creativity created big magic in every area of her experience. Here's how you can apply this in your own life. Gilbert suggests what she calls whole-life creativity, identifying ways to bring creative consciousness to everything you do. Start by choosing one routine activity and approaching it as if it were an art project. How can you bring more beauty, creativity, or personal expression to cooking dinner, organizing your workspace, or even doing laundry? Develop what Gilbert calls creative integration practice, regularly asking yourself, how can I bring more creativity and artistry to this situation? The key is recognizing that creativity isn't something you do in addition to life. It's a way of living life itself. Gilbert warns against the common mistake of compartmentalizing creativity into separate, artistic activities. Instead, focus on what she calls artistic consciousness, bringing the same attention, care, and creative problem-solving to all areas of your life. One practical tool from Big Magic is the Big Magic Inventory, regularly assessing where you're already experiencing creative fulfillment and where you might invite more creativity. Look for opportunities to integrate artistic thinking into work, relationships, home environment, and daily routines. The deeper truth here is that big magic isn't about creating masterpieces. It's about creating a masterful life. When you approach existence with creative consciousness, you don't just make art occasionally. You transform your entire experience into an ongoing work of art that reflects your unique vision and values. This connects to Gilbert's broader philosophy that creativity is fundamentally about celebrating and expressing the gift of being alive. People who master big magic experience what she calls creative aliveness, a heightened sense of engagement, wonder, and possibility that makes ordinary moments feel extraordinary. As the examples throughout Big Magic demonstrate, this way of living is available to anyone willing to choose creativity over conformity, curiosity over cynicism, and courage over comfort. Your action step from this chapter. Identify one area of your daily life where you can bring more creative consciousness this week. Perhaps your morning routine, workspace organization, or evening meal preparation. Approach this area as if it were an art project, bringing the same attention and creativity you would to any artistic endeavor. Notice how this artistic approach affects both the activity itself and your overall sense of aliveness and engagement with life. Conclusion. Over the past 45 minutes, we've journeyed through Elizabeth Gilbert's groundbreaking research in Big Magic, Creative Living Beyond Fear, a book that has transformed millions of lives and spent months on bestseller lists worldwide, proving that creativity truly is everyone's birthright. Let's recap the 10 key insights. First, that courage is the foundation of all creative living. We don't need to eliminate fear, just learn to create alongside it. Second, that ideas are living beings seeking human collaboration rather than possessions we own. Third, that permission comes from within. No external authority can grant or deny your creative birthright. Fourth, that persistence creates the conditions for inspiration through consistent daily practice. Fifth, that trust means releasing attachment to outcomes while fully committing to the process. Sixth, that enchantment is a choice we make to see wonder and possibility in everyday life. Seventh, that resilience can be built through developing systematic tools for processing rejection and setbacks. Eighth, that each creative project deserves fresh trust regardless of past experiences. Ninth, that creativity has a sacred dimension connecting us to something larger than ourselves. And finally, that big magic happens when we integrate creative consciousness into every aspect of our lives. Gilbert's research shows us that creativity isn't a luxury for the talented few. It's the natural state of human beings willing to live with courage, curiosity, and trust. Most importantly, Big Magic reveals that you don't need permission, credentials, or perfect conditions to begin living creatively right now. Here's what I want you to remember from Big Magic. Fear will always be part of creativity, but it doesn't have to drive your choices. Your creative dreams aren't selfish indulgences. They're gifts waiting to be shared with the world through your unique perspective and voice. The practices Gilbert outlines: cultivating courage, trusting ideas, giving yourself permission, showing up consistently, and approaching life with wonder. These aren't one-time activities. They're lifelong commitments to living as the creative being you were born to be. Start small. Choose one creative practice from today's summary and commit to it for just 1 week. Remember Gilbert's most encouraging message. You were born creative, and that creativity is seeking ways to express itself through your unique life experience. By applying the principles in Big Magic, you're not just improving your artistic skills. You're reclaiming your birthright as a creative being and transforming your entire relationship with possibility, wonder, and authentic self-expression. Your journey toward Big Magic starts now. Give yourself permission to create, trust the process, and let your creativity become the guiding force that transforms your life from ordinary to extraordinary.